Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
In 1922, a giant bat-like creature had been seen in the vicinity of West Drayton Church. An old man who claimed he had seen the giant bat 25 years previously maintained that it was the spirit of a vampire who had murdered a woman to drink her blood in Harmondsworth in the 1890s. No one took the oldster's tale seriously. Then, on the 16th of April 1922, so began a series of attacks on the general public which bore all the marks of a blood-sucking assailant. Several people witnessed a tall black creature with wings flying around a church. They say that it went into the church cemeteries and ran around the graves. 2 policemen chased it and it let out an awful scream and flew away. For a short period, the bustling metropolis of London was on vampire alert. It was 6 a.m. and a local clerk was walking to work, heading down Coventry Street. Suddenly he was accosted from the shadows by an unseen form which bit him in the throat. The man collapsed unconscious to the floor and awoke in Charing Cross Hospital, where he told the surgeons of his grim encounter. His tale seemed too far-fetched to the doctors. They believed he'd been stabbed in the neck. Then, just over 2 hours later, another attack took place. A second man was rushed to the hospital and had the same encounter to speak of as blood trickled from his throat. He'd been attacked by an invisible predator at exactly the same spot. As the hospital staff attempted to solve the mystery, during late evening another man was attacked, his throat punctured by an unseen assailant at exactly the same spot, the turning just off Coventry Street. The police could not fathom as to what had happened, and the press were quick to lap up the grisly rumors that a vampire-like attacker was on the loose, with the Daily Mail reporting on the sinister encounters. A reporter boldly and yet sarcastically asked the police if a vampire could be on the loose, and the officer replied nervously, "That's all," and left the conference. As hysteria rose in the area, there was a rumor that the police hired a vampire hunter, where he chased the being and stabbed him in the heart with a stake. The corpse was taken to Highgate Cemetery soon after the attack stopped. The story may sound like a piece of horror fiction, but how uncanny that a handful of decades later a bizarre, vampire-like specter would be seen to haunt and attack within the confines of the gloomy cemetery.
I once had a strange encounter with a woman who claimed to be a vampire. At first I thought she was on drugs, but then she did something that made me wonder if she was telling the truth. When I was 16, a friend and I were walking through our local park at night, in Colorado, when we saw this Asian woman wearing what looked like traditional Chinese dress dancing alone in the grass. She then started running towards us, scared the shit out of me, and began telling us how handsome we were. This woman appeared to be in her mid to late 20s, and honestly she was stunningly beautiful. She kept telling us that she was a vampire and that she was centuries old. I was thinking, okay, she's obviously on drugs, but then she gazes into my eyes and says, "Do you want to feel my energy?" I said, "Sure." Then she placed her hand a few inches from my face. The amount of energy, or whatever it was that came from her hand, caused my entire skull to vibrate and made me extremely dizzy. I don't know WTF that was. I never saw her again, and to this day I often think about it. I'm 23 now. I tried researching Asian myths and legends, trying to find some kind of spirit or demon common to a specific culture that resembles her. Could anyone tell me what this apparition was? Or if she was just a crazy woman with psychic abilities? Afterwards I was lightheaded, which lasted about 30 seconds to a minute. For the rest of the night I just remember feeling weird and uneasy about the whole experience. She did the same thing to him after. We both felt it and were freaked out. It was like a force push. It felt like being electrocuted, but without the pain. Imagine vibrational waves going through your face and out the back of your head. Afterwards I was very lightheaded.
When my mother was young, living in Tacoma, Washington, a mere few blocks from Puget Sound, 3 houses down from the home Bing Crosby was born in, she said a strange family had moved in. You never saw activity during the day, but they were always entertaining at night. There seemed to be a pair of couples and perhaps an additional male or 2 in the household. Mom said they could see elegant interiors, yet unkempt exteriors. They never interacted with anyone in the neighborhood, ever. Now, they all dressed very elegant in old-fashioned, dark Edwardian style. All of them seemed young yet old, and careless if you will. They quickly gained the reputation of odd, leading folks to whisper, vampires. They never saw anything like it. 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 They ne One night in 1953 when my mom was 9, she remembers being late, hurrying home before dark or she would be in trouble. She wasn't paying attention and smack. She ran right into a tall, handsome, very pale man with all black eyes wearing an evening cape of black with red lining. He grabbed her, looked at her, set her back and told her to pass by quickly. She ran home as fast as she could, knowing she just ran into one of them and had a lucky break. The next morning the headlines in the papers reported a young woman found dead in the park not far from their house. She had been drained of blood. The neighborhood Vamps left the area shortly thereafter.
On May 1, 1932, a 32-year-old courtesan, Lily Lindström, was discussing plans for the evening's May Day celebrations with her friend Minnie Jansen, a 35-year-old woman who lived on the same floor and made her living in the same way. Lily was nicknamed the call girl because she was the only person in the building with a phone. Lily received a call from a potential client, asking if he could come over. Lily agreed, and Minnie left her to it. On May 4, 1932, Lily was found dead in her flat in the Sankta Riksplan district of Stockholm, Sweden. She was last seen alive by her friend Minnie. Minnie said Lily had to go to her apartment twice one evening to borrow condoms. On the second occasion, around 9 p.m., Lily was totally naked beneath her coat. That was the last that was seen of Lily for a couple of days. Minnie became concerned after ringing Lily's doorbell and getting no reply. She called the police, who forced their way in. Lily was found lying dead on the sofa, her clothes neatly folded on a chair nearby. Her skull had been dealt a crushing blow. What elevates this case from the tragic to the utterly bizarre, though, was the fact that somebody had been drinking her blood. In the room was a blood-stained gravy ladle. Further inspection revealed that the blood had been drained from Lily's body, and the killer had used the ladle to drink it. Despite the authorities' best efforts, the story leaked, and the local press nicknamed the unknown killer the Atlas Vampire, due to the area of the city in which Lily lived. 80 of Lily's customers were investigated, but no suspects were revealed. Minnie hadn't recognized the voice on the phone from what she'd heard, but she commented that the man had seemed sober and polite. There didn't seem to be any fingerprints on any of the suspicious items at the scene. One theory was that the killer was a police officer who had bludgeoned Lily with his truncheon and knew how to cover his tracks. Either way, Lily's final customer was never found.
In 2005, authorities in Craiova, southwest Romania, opened an investigation against 6 people alleged to have impaled the body of a villager who, according to them, had transformed himself into a vampire and sucked blood from them during the night. The body of Petre Toma had been unearthed 6 weeks later by his brother-in-law in the presence of several other members of the family, including his widow and her granddaughter. According to several testimonies, they made an incision in the chest of Toma to extract his heart before burning it. One report states that, in accordance with a local custom to protect against vampires, they dissolved the ashes in water and drank it. An autopsy carried out by the authorities in Craiova confirmed that the heart was indeed taken. The 6 people explained that after the death of Toma they had felt weakened, as if they did not have any more blood.
One night I saw it in my room, and in the morning I could not arise, so much was I weakened,
said the granddaughter of Toma, Mirela Marinescu. According to her, as soon as the exorcism ritual was performed, the dead body did not come any more to haunt its family. The Sunday Times reported that several villagers affirmed that this exorcism ritual was known and practiced for a long time in the area, and that it each time had appeared effective against vampires.
For centuries we have had to protect ourselves against these creatures by finding the graves of the undead and risking our lives by ripping out their hearts,
said 68-year-old Tita Muska, a local farmer. The year was 1932. A young girl stormed down Royal Street, visibly panicked, her stride broken only by the diligent interception of a police officer. Her story sounded a bit far-fetched, tied up by 2 brothers, along with several other victims, and held captive so the brothers could drink their blood. The girl claimed that she was only able to escape due to her captor's carelessness in securing her ropes. Somewhat skeptical, the police agreed to follow her back to the home on the corner of Royal and St. Anne. Once the police and the girl arrived at the home, which was owned by the Carter brothers, they were horrified to find, as the girl had described, 4 other victims, half dead, tied to chairs in one of the rooms. All victims had their wrists wrapped with bandages, moist and stained with blood. 2 more bodies wrapped in blankets were tucked away in yet another room. The unmistakable suffocating odor of death permeated the apartment. It seemed the brothers left early each morning just before daybreak and returned every evening just after dark. Immediately upon their return, they would take the bandages off each of the captives' wrists and, using a knife, reopen their wounds until blood flowed freely from the victims' cuts. They caught the blood in cups from which they drank until their hunger was sated. The brothers would then redress the wounds with fresh bandages. They spoke very little and gave no concern for their victims' well-being. Rather, the kidnapped were no more than a food source headed for certain death. Unaware that the girl had escaped, John and Wayne Carter went about their routine as usual. Only this time, the police waited for the brothers to return. They were quickly apprehended, and upon their capture, confessed almost immediately, begging to be murdered. The brothers explained to authorities that they were, in fact, vampires and would, if released, have no option but to continue to kill, as their need for drinking blood was beyond their control. It said the brothers were tried as serial killers, convicted and eventually executed. In 1978, two curious paranormal investigators set up a video camera in front of the convent and waited through the night for paranormal activity. Sometime during the night, the camera stopped filming. The next day, they were both found dead on the steps of St. Mary's Catholic Church next to the convent with their throats torn open and their bodies drained of 80% of their blood. This crime was never solved. In 1984, 9 people were found dead in various sections of the French Quarter of New Orleans. They all had been murdered by having their throats torn out. The paramedics responding to the scenes were struck by the fact that there was no blood at the scenes. Something or someone had simply sucked all the blood directly from the victims. Police to this day do not have a suspect in this case. The murder spree ended as quickly as it had begun. Rumors suggested that it was the work of a rogue vampire that was destroyed by the elder vampire sect of New Orleans because of pressure placed by authorities on the known vampire community in the city.
In the spring of 1788, a family set up housekeeping in the small mountain community of Dillsboro, North Carolina. The family name was Alford, and there were rumors that they had descended from royalty. They bought land by the river and built what was then a very nice large southern colonial home. Dr. Alford opened up an office and pharmacy in a few rooms in the front of the house. The local people were at first really happy that a new doctor had arrived in their community, but very quickly this attitude was about to change. 2 men both who had gone to the new doctor to be treated for gout suddenly died. Both men had been well-liked members of the community, and the circumstances angered many of the residents. However, in a short time the local minister had brokered peace in the community and everything seemed to be fine. However, this calm was short-lived. That fall the young daughter of the minister was found dead in her bed with puncture marks to her throat. The minister's wife swore she had seen a dark form hovering over her daughter and she screamed, but it was too late and the child quickly succumbed to the attack. The incident caused a huge outcry in the town and the people of the area started to claim a vampire or a group of vampires was in their midst. For many nights groups of men ventured out and searched but found nothing. However, some men claimed to have seen a large black bat-like creature fly over them. A few nights after the sighting, a young boy ran down the hill to his grandfather's house and proclaimed that something was up the hill in his house attacking his parents. The grandfather summoned other men and they ran to the house, but only found the parents and their 2 young daughters, who were dead with puncture wounds to their necks. The area was immediately alerted, soldiers were called in and searched the area. By February of 1789 the community had quieted down. Then one evening screams were heard, and when men arrived they witnessed a black form of a human run from the house, run down the hill and into the Alford house. When the village men went into the house where the screams had come from, they found the bodies of a young couple with vicious bite marks to their throats. Almost at once more men came and they were told that the murderer had ran down the hill and into the Alford house. When the search party got to the Alford house, Dr. Alford refused to let them in. However, as soon as the sheriff arrived they dragged Dr. Alford outside and tied him to a tree. When the men entered the house they were surprised at what they found. The upstairs bedrooms each had beds, but it was clear that no one had slept in them. When the sheriff and search party went downstairs they found 3 caskets and Mrs. Alford, who was dressed in black, lying in one of the caskets and very much alive. She hissed and cursed at them as she was pulled from the casket. Later that night the sheriff and the village minister announced to the crowd assembled outside the Alford house that the Alfords and their son were vampires. The Alfords were summarily hanged and then placed back inside the house. The house was set on fire and burned to the ground. However, the couple's 15-year-old son was not found and never seen in the area again. There were no further unusual murders in the area.
In 1926, Agnes Mergosai wrote in The Vampire in Romany the ways to determine if any dead man is a vampire. 1. His household, his family, and his livestock, and possibly even the livestock of the whole village, die off rapidly. 2. He comes back in the night and speaks with the family. He may eat what he finds in dishes and knock things about, or he may help with the housework and cut wood. Female vampires also come back to their children. There was a Hungarian vampire which could not be kept away, even by the priest in holy water. 3. The priest reads a service at the grave. If the evil which is occurring does not cease, it is a bad sign. 4. A hole about the size of a serpent may be found near the tombstone of the dead man. If so, it is a sign of a vampire, because vampires come out of graves with just such holes. 5. Even in the daytime, a white horse will not walk over the grave of a vampire, but stands still and snorts and neighs. 6. A gander, similarly, will not walk over the grave of a vampire. 7. On exhuming the corpse, if it is a vampire, it will be found to be 1. Red in the face, even for months and years after burial. 2. With the face turned downwards. 3. With a foot retracted and forced into a corner of the grave or coffin. 4. If relatives have died, the mouth will be red with blood. If it has only spoiled and ruined things at home and eaten what it could find, the mouth will be covered with a maize meal.
The Dome was a restaurant on the Sunset Strip. Back in the mid-1980s, I was in the lounge enjoying a drink with a friend. Near us, a striking, elegant couple was seated. They both looked European. She was a stunning brunette. Her face had all the captivating features that can get a guy in trouble. Dark red lipstick sealed the deal. A timeless long black evening gown graced the contours of her remarkable body. This was the kind of woman every leading actress in old Hollywood wanted to be. He was blonde, strong with chiseled features, classically handsome. Some men exuded presence and his was heroic. He wore a black tuxedo. Draped from his shoulders hung a matching half cape. There was a red ribbon near his neck. The ribbon was either some kind of adornment to his shirt and collar, or it may have been the closure that fastened his cape. They were sitting at a small round table in front of a charming fireplace. Above the fireplace mantel, a mirror reflected the low glow of a few wall sconces in the room. They sat opposite each other, separated by a lit candle placed at the center of the table. Each had a tall glass of red wine. Their posture was properly perfect. Their demeanor was stoic. These two were mysterious. I felt that this couple was not in costume. There were no Halloween parties that time of year, and I don't believe their reason to be there was to stage theatricality for the sake of getting attention. No, they were simply being whoever they were. Intrigued by them, I often peered, sneaking glances, to see what they were doing. They sat and looked at each other. The entire time they were there, I never saw them speak. I never saw them drink. Each glass remained completely full. They didn't gesture. Not for a moment did he or she fidget to get comfortable. They just didn't move at all. That was odd. I joked that I don't believe in vampires, but if there are any, we might be seeing two of them right now. It seemed silly, but I became eager to see them leave. They would have to stand up. They would be standing in front of the fireplace mirror. I truly wanted to see if they had a reflection in that mirror. So I looked over at them even more often, too often. I admit that I bruised the boundary of social etiquette. But my curiosity trumped good manners. I didn't care. I wanted to see them in front of that mirror. I didn't want to miss seeing that. After looking away for a brief moment, I looked back to see them again. Unbelievably, they were gone and the wine glasses had vanished too. I was astonished. One can surmise that Aledo Maitre D simply escorted them away to a dining table, that somehow I was distracted, lost track of time, and missed that activity. That is the rational explanation. But I'll never really know what happened. You see, afterward, I walked through the restaurant to see if they were seated at a dining table. I didn't find them.
In 1933, intense terror shrouded over St. Augustine, Florida. On the morning of October 5th, a man visiting his brother discovered the bodies of his brother, his wife, and their 3 children. All of the dead had open wounds in their throats where something had fed and sucked the blood from the victims. The Turner family all appeared to have been dead for 2 to 3 days at the time they were discovered. Every mirror in the house had been broken and several crosses and other religious artifacts the family owned had been thrown out of a back window into the yard. Blood was smeared on walls throughout the house. It was clear that someone had taken a lot of time in doing so. Neighbors said that they heard nothing, but another man a few doors down said that he saw a very dark man dressed all in black leave the house just before daylight a day or two before. He said the man walked past him and he clearly heard the man make a hissing sound at him as he walked by. Police at the time conducted extensive searches. Bloodhounds were even brought in, but no trace of whoever or whatever committed the horrible crime was ever found. The local newspapers both placed the same headline across the front: "Vampire stalks St. Augustine." In time, the murders faded from memory. It's still part of public record, though the case remains unsolved. Since the Middle Ages, Romania has been renowned for vampires. In the kingdoms and dominions of Transylvania, Wallachia, and Moldavia that the tales of vampires are more abundant than anywhere else. The Romanian folklore remained infallible despite interventions that were historically present from the Romans, the Hungarians, and the Ottoman Turks. Romania maintained absolute rules and regulations in obstructing the dead from coming back to life. Traditional Romanians believed that the initial sign of one being or becoming a vampire was the birth of a child under abnormal circumstances. Some of these circumstances included a child being born out of wedlock, born with a caul, the amniotic membrane that surrounds a fetus, or death occurring before a baptismal could be performed. If a person was aware of their irregular births, they would leave instructions upon their deaths to have the necessary precautions taken, preventing them from rising again as one of the undead. It was also believed that if a woman was with child and did not consume salt, or was to be gazed upon by a vampire, especially one past her 6th month of pregnancy, that her child was doomed to eternal damnation of becoming one of the undead. The only way to redeem the unborn child's soul was to seek the blessing of the church. Yet another belief regarding vampires and the birth of a child was to be born the 7th son of the 7th son, or likewise, the 7th daughter of the 7th daughter. They were said to sometimes be born with a tail and could eventually become a vampire. Although odd births were the most prevalent in beliefs of one becoming a vampire in Romania, it was not the only way one could become a member of the undead. If someone was bitten, they could become a vampire. If someone lived a wicked life, such as practicing witchcraft, committed suicide, had sworn a false oath, was excommunicated by the church, or their corpse was leaped over by a cat, they were prime vampire candidates. A vampire was always suspected if sudden death struck consistently in a family or livestock, followed by the passing of either a family member or of someone who was questioned about being a vampire. It was said that vampires were known to appear to their families on occasion, especially females, since they wanted to be around their children. They would return to their mortal residency and make their presence known by throwing items around, or getting into the food. The vampire would then begin to assault family members and livestock and then move its way on to the villagers. If the vampires were not annihilated, they could possibly move on to more distant villages and also other countries where they would re-establish themselves into society as mortals, and no one would be the wiser. The Feast of St. Andrew, accompanied with the Feast of St. George and Easter, was acknowledged as one of the most feared times of the year in Romania. The Feast of St. Andrew was in honor of St. Andrew, who was the patron of wolves and donor of garlic. It was on St. Andrew's Eve, in certain parts of Romania, that the vampire was believed to be the most active and dangerous. The vampires were also believed to continue their activity throughout the winter and rest at Epiphany, January. During these perilous times, it was considered wise to rub garlic on the doors and windows to protect families within the residence from any vampire attacks. Livestock was also at risk of an attack, so precautions were taken with them as well by rubbing them down with garlic. Romanians took every precaution against becoming a vampire or harming anyone if they did become one. Graves were carefully watched for any signs that signified a disturbance. Such signatures of a vampire's presence could be a small hole located near the headstone. It was believed that a vampire could enter and leave their grave through this hole. Upon observing this, the deceased would be exhumed. If the corpse was found to be red in the face, it was without a doubt a vampire. Other signs of the corpse being a vampire was if the corpse was found lying face down in the coffin accompanied by fresh blood upon it, or, on occasion, traces of cornmeal would be found. Also, one foot might be found pulled in at one corner of the coffin. Another customary practice amongst the Romanians was to dig up the graves of the departed 3 years following the death of a child, 4 to 5 years following the death of a young person, and 7 years following the death of an adult. If only skeletal remains were found, they would be cleansed and returned to their graves, but if the corpse was found to be fleshly preserved, it was then believed to be a vampire, and dealt with in the manner as all vampires were. If while alive, one was believed to be vampire-prone, many precautions were taken with their burial upon their death. Sometimes garlic would be placed in the corpse's mouth, or millet seeds would be placed in the coffin to postpone the vampire, who would have to go through a lengthy process of eating them before they could rise from their grave, or a thorny branch of the wild rose may be placed in their coffin. Once the vampire-prone deceased member was buried, a distaff would be driven into the ground above the grave in belief that the vampire would impale itself if it tried to rise from its grave. On the anniversary of the death of a vampire-prone subject, the family would walk around the grave. More harsher preventive measures would be to stake the corpse with iron or wood, either in the heart or the navel. Sometimes, the body would be buried face down and reversed in the coffin. And, on more extreme levels, the corpse would be removed from the grave and to the woods to be dismembered. The heart and liver would first be removed, and then the rest of the body would be burned, piece by piece. The ashes would then be preserved and mixed with water and given to the family members to drink to prevent any vampire attacks.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.